everybody, it's Angel from Halo Inspirations. We give you inspirations to help you spread beauty and joy through your quilting journey. Today is the second week of the Springtime Placemats for the beginner quilter. Whoop whoop! Oh, this is so much fun. I hope that you enjoy it just as much as I do. So the first part of this week is cutting your fabric. And I hope you have your fabric and your pattern. I've got my pattern pulled up on my computer here just to make sure I'm following directions. And I encourage you to do the same, unless you've printed them, but you can have them on your computer. You can have it printed, but just so that you have it and you're following along. If you did buy fabric and you did it in the measurements that the pattern suggested, you're going to need to square and cut that fabric. So if you're very new and you haven't cut fabric before, I encourage you to watch the how to square your fabric and cut it. I'll put a link up here in the video that I've already done. I'll put a link up here, and that way you can go and watch that and make sure that you're cutting accurate. It is one of the crucial steps in making sure that your blocks come out to the right size, okay? Now, you are going to need to cut all that fabric. Get it all ready to go, okay? But I wanted to add something about cutting. It's so important, just like the saying goes, measure twice, cut once. And I'm telling you this because I didn't do that on one of my squares. And I ended up cutting too short, and I didn't have enough of that print to do another. So I had to switch it out. And there's nothing more of a bummer when you got a plan in your head and then you got to make a change, or you run out of fabric and you don't have more fabric and then you got to wait for it to be ordered. So again, measure twice, cut once. And when you're looking at it, if the pattern says cut 2-inch strips, make sure you're on the whole number and you're on 2, not 3, but 2, right? If it says 2 1/4, make sure you're on that quarter line and it's a 2 1/4. And then if it's 2 1/2, make sure you're on that half mark of 2 1/2 and not 3 1/2 or 4 1/2. I mean, that's really pushing it. But you don't even want to be on, like if it says 2 1/2, make sure you're not on the 2 1/4. So it's just a word of advice, because even the best of us get it, it happens, right? But the one way to prevent it is to double check yourself before you make that cut. So I just wanted to add that little bit of tidbit of advice. I know it's unsolicited, but I just went through it, and there's nothing more frustrating than, of course, having not enough fabric. So get all your fabric cut, and I will say the next part we're doing is that we're going to start making our blocks. And in both variations, that you do get both variations in the pattern, which there's a link down below. So if you're interested in purchasing the pattern, it's there for you. But the next part is building the block, and in both variations, there is a 9 patch. Okay, so we're going to start with the 9 patch and get it built and get it together. Let's get this party started. Okay, so the first part of any block, it doesn't matter if it's a 9 patch or it doesn't matter what the block is, but the first step of each block is that you want to take the individual units and lay them out exactly how you would want them in the finished block. So I've done that here. This is how I want them to finish. Now, as far as a 9 patch goes, what we want to do is we want to sew each row together, and then we're going to sew the rows all together. Okay, and we're going to walk through this. I'm going to do it with you. So the first step we're going to do before we begin sewing, we want to have some sort of organized fashion, and actually something that'll help expedient, because we could take all day sewing this all together, and it doesn't need to be, right? So I'm going to take and make sure, the other thing I was going to add is make sure that all your fabric is facing right side up, okay? That's very important, because we sew right sides together to get our seams hidden, all right? So what you're going to do is you're going to take this block and you're going to fold it over. Then we're going to take this block and we're going to fold it on top of this one. And again with the third. Now, before I go to the sewing machine, I could get really confused which side I was sewing. So what I do to remind myself is I don't have to put them pretty together right now. I can do that at the sewing machine. I'm just going to clip which side I want to sew them on. Okay, So after we get these sewn, we'll come back and take the next step. Okay, so here I am at the sewing machine, and I didn't think it was necessary at this time to really be close in so you can actually watch the sewing. If I'm wrong, let me know that I'm wrong. I'll do an extra video with that. I just didn't think it was, so just let me know. I can take care of that. But I wanted you also to notice I've got a ruler and I got a couple of 2.5-inch squares, okay? And I've got them right sides together at this point. And I have measured them to make sure that they're each 2.5 inch. Now, why do I have these? You would think they're scraps. They're not scraps. I'm actually going to save them. I use 2.5-inch squares in a lot of different patterns. So I will save these and make something from them later, right? But I'm using them right now. Before I get started sewing, I always check my 1/4-inch seam. It is crucial that your 1/4-inch seam is on mark to get the appropriate size block finish, okay? So if we sew these 2.5-inch squares together, we do a little finger pressing and we measure them, they should measure at 4.5 inches long. So it should be 2.5 inches tall by 4.5 inches long. Now I use a seam guide, a seam gauge with a seam guide. Okay, for now, I've got some other products that I'm testing out. I'm in love with this one. And I have done a very extensive video on the 1/4-inch seam. I'll put a link up here so that you can go and watch it. But it is very, very important to get those right size blocks. The first step is cutting that fabric correctly. The second step is having a great 1/4-inch seam. So I'm going to check it right now. I actually know from experience that I tend to sew with a scant 1/4-inch. So that's what I have it lined up as. Now, if you'll also notice, those fabrics were not batiks. I do have some batiks over here that I'm going to be using as leader enders, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But they're different. Different fabrics have different thicknesses and different tightnesses of how they're woven. And when I check my 1/4-inch seam, I try to use something very similar with the project I'm working with. And batiks are their own animal. So I know that when I use them as leader enders, I'm going to have some differences, but I'll be able to cut them down. So I'm okay with that. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. So we're going to go ahead and run this through. Now, as far as the seam guide and seam gauge, in the 1/4-inch seam video, I do talk about 2 other ways to get your 1/4-inch seam. So seriously, I would check it out if you're curious or if you're new and you want to learn about the 1/4-inch seam, because it's really important. So I've cut it through. I've sewn it through. I'm going to cut my threads. I'm going to go ahead and open her up. And I'm just going to do a finger press, which means I'm not going to take it to the iron right now. I'm just going to simply use the heat from my fingers and I'm going to press them open, okay? Then I'll take my ruler and I'll line it up. And like I said, it should measure 2.5 inches tall, which I know it will because I've pre-measured these. Oh my gosh, y'all, this is absolutely perfect. Okay. It's at exactly 4.5 inches. I can't get any better than that. So I'm really excited about this because I don't have to make adjustments. If you were too wide or too long, if you're more than 4.5 or you're less than 4.5, you're going to have to adjust your seam gauge or seam guide or your needle or however it is that you make those adjustments. And I do talk about that in the video also. So we're going to go ahead and start sewing our block together. Okay, now remember, I've used clips. I want to say that you can also use pins. You don't have to have wonder clips. Just anything to let you know which side you need to sew on, because you can get them backwards. Trust me, been there, done that. That's exactly why I line these I pin them up, so I know that on this side, I need to sew, okay? Now, what you want to do is you want to make sure it was those right sides that were together, okay? And then you want to make sure they line up so nice and pretty, okay? Now, typically, I use a leader ender or a spider, which again, those are in some of my other videos, but it's basically, a spider's basically I don't even think I have one right now, a little piece of fabric that you can use to guide before you run your your squares in, because, oh, I might have one. Oh, I do. Okay, so I'm going to use this, and you can see I've already used it a couple of times. What that does is it prevents, sometimes when you're sewing, your feed dogs grab onto your corners and they suck them down inside the machine, and then you got a hot mess, right? So this, when it's like this, it's a spider, okay? Yes, it's a leader ender, but it is a spider. And they call it a spider because as you get more and more threads on it, they get little legs, and it could be like, you know, 8 legs of a spider. So I'm going to go ahead and put the spider underneath. I'm going to sew it through a little bit till it's right at the end. And then I'm going to put my 2 blocks underneath. And I'm going to sew those. And right when I get to the end, I'm going to take the next set. I'm not going to cut threads right now. And I'm going to add the next 2. Thank goodness for the clip, so I know what side to sew on. And I'm going to slide it up underneath my foot. And I'm going to go ahead and sew those. Get to the end. Take the last group. Get them all lined up nice and pretty. Now remember, I still haven't cut threads. Get them all nice and pretty here. Slide it up underneath my presser foot a little bit. Begin sewing. Now here's where the leader ender comes in, and I'm a big starter ender, leader ender. There's different terminology. I think Bonnie Hunter coined the term leader ender. I'm not sure. But I've got some blocks over here that are part of another project. They're 2.5 square of batik. One of the things about batiks is it's hard to tell which one's the right side and which one's not. So I'm going to line those up. And I'm going to sew those. Still, I haven't cut any threads. And I'm not going to cut threads with my machine at this point. I've got my lead, or I'm sorry, at this point, it's the end of the change. So this is my ender at this point. And I've got all of these different, here, I'm going to pull this off. And as you see, they're like in a little chain. Okay, so here's that spider I started with. There's a little bit of fabric between each one of these, okay? So then at this point, you want to keep them in order, especially when it starts getting more of a complicated block. I do know that this is the first one, this is the second one, this is the third one, right? So I'm going to sit here for just a second. And I'm going to, normally I have scissors, but I forgot to grab them before I started the video. So I'm just using good old Jack. He's my friend at this point. Oop. Okay. This was my first one. So it goes on top. This was my second one. And this was my third. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do it at this point. I will tell you. And I want to also add at this point that I'm showing you my method. There are a lot of different methods, and there is not one wrong way. If it works for you and you get the same results, that's all that matters, okay? Don't let anybody tell you differently. There are so many methods. I'm just showing you mine. So now at this point, this ender is now becoming a starter or a leader, okay? Because I'm going to feed behind it. But what I do, so I've put them all back together, okay? I don't press yet because I'm just adding this top row. We've sewn them all together and we have that one square on each side, okay? I'm going to open up the first one. I'm going to do a little bit of finger pressing just to help it to stay open and make it easier. And I'm going to put it back. I'm going to do each one of those. And you want to press to the dark side. What does that mean? In this situation, this is white and this is yellow. This is actually a darker color. So when I press it, I want the seam to go towards the yellow, okay? On this one, I wanted it to go towards the blue. So when I opened it up, I pressed towards the blue, okay? And I'm laying it back out, as you can see. This is the open with me pressing. This is the extras that we haven't added yet. And then we have one more. Now I want to show you a trick. Whatever side that you want it to the seam to lay, have that piece of fabric on top. I'll put pictures in. And then go ahead and press it open, okay? So now we have all of these opened up, did a little finger pressing so they stay open, and then we're just going to simply take those extra blocks and fold it over. Each one of them. And again, take our clips. Not that you need it, because you should know, but just in case, so it doesn't make you forget, we're going to clip them. Okay, and then we're going to start sewing again. So now we're going to go ahead and sew these together. Now remember, I still have that couple of 2.5-inch squares of that batik sitting here. So now it's become the starter or the leader. I'm going to line these up nice and pretty. I know that I want to sew along which edge based on the fact that I clipped it. And I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. I'm not going to cut threads. I'm going to go to the end here. I'm going to grab the next one, put corner to corner, making sure it's nice and straight. Put that underneath. Now I do tend to lift my presser foot to place it underneath, that way it does grab it. Whoop, I can tell that it's crooked. Before I started sewing, that's a good thing. Whoop, see, I didn't grab it. There it goes. We got one more. Okay, making sure it's nice and straight. Lift the presser foot a little bit, place it underneath. Oh boy. Still didn't grab it. There we go. Oh, I saw a little quilting bling. Those are your little pieces of thread that attach. We call that quilting bling. And then I'm going to grab the next two blocks to form another ender. Now remember, this is from a different project. It also, doing it this way also prevents waste of thread, because if you cut threads and then reintroduce a new block, you've got that long tail that you're just going to throw away. This way I don't have that. So I put my ender through. got scissors. And now I'm going to cut between the ender and the last block. And again, we call that chain piecing. So we've chain pieced all these together. I'm going to snip off the blocks that was my starter ender. I'll put that aside because it's another project. First block I cut is the first section. Second block I'm going to cut here. It's the third section or second section, and then the last one. So at this point where I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this to the pressing board and measure out my units to make sure that they're accurate. Don't forget to take out the 1/4 inch for each block. So you have a 1/4 inch with this one, a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch for the middle because it's a 1/4 on one side and then a 1/4 on the other. So it's a 1/2 inch, and then subtract the 1/4 on the last block. So you're going to subtract a total of, let's see, a 1/4 plus a 1/4 plus a 1/2, an inch, right? Yeah, you're going to take an inch off of the total amount. So whatever the block size, let's say they were 3-inch blocks, that'd be 3, 6, 9 inches total. You would take an inch off, it'd be 8. So whatever the pattern says, take an inch off when you measure it. But I'm going to take you to the pressing board because I want to show you how to press these, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so here we are at the pressing mat. Yes, I need to clean mine. God forbid. Okay, so I remember I told you we always want to sew, or not sew, but press to the dark side. So this is the first block, okay? What I'm going to do here, and pressing is very important. It's also one of the crucial points to getting your blocks to the right size. So what you want to do first is just lay down your iron and give it a good press on the seam. What that does, thread and material tends to have a little bit of water involved, okay? And it allows it to just relax a little bit. So we just did a quick prep on the seam. We're going to open it up. I do tend to finger press just a little, and we want it to go to the dark side. So I had the dark piece on top when I flipped it. And then we're just going to simply press both seams open. So that's one. Then we go to the second one, give a little bit of a prep, release that thread in that seam a little bit, go ahead and give it a little bit of a finger press. Now, oh, I went the wrong direction, see? All right, let's try it again. So I'm going to relax and I'm going to place, this is the side that I want to go, the dark side. The dark side's on top. I'm going to relax the seam, relax that thread and the material, give it a good little bit of a finger press, and then we're just going to simply press those seams. It's always good to show you my error. I wasn't thinking. Don't do what I do and not think. Now this is the one I was demonstrating with earlier. So I'm going to relax that seam. And now the dark side's on top. So I'm going to relax the seam in the material. I'm going to give it a little bit of a finger press after I give it a little hit. Both seams are going towards the dark side. There's 1 and 2. So, seams are going towards the dark side. Seams are going towards the dark side. And again, seams are going towards the dark side. Now, if you notice, these ones are going out, these ones are going in, and these ones are going out. And that's very important because it's going to allow us really to nest those seams together and make sure that the points, the seams line up, butted right up next to each other. And that's going to give us a beautiful point So that's why I want you to press towards the dark side, okay? Because it allows those seams to nest. So we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew these together. See you in a bit. So at this point, we have our 3 rows, okay? All the blocks are the right size. Everything should work great. I hope I can do this at this angle. This is a little tricky for me. So we're going to take this top row, row 1, and we're going to take the right sides. This is right side up. This is right side up. Remember, the right side is the pretty side. And we're going to flip it over on top of the second row. Then you want to go ahead and begin to line it up nice and pretty and get those seams nested. The nesting of the seams is key to getting those beautiful points. So when you think you have that seam nested, you can take a pin and pin it to the left side of the seam, okay? Then you go to the other side. You want to make sure that your seam is nested. Beautiful, beautiful nesting seam. When you think they're together, you want to take it, and I'm going to put it on the other side. Okay? And then if you really are, when you very first begin, pinning seems to be like a necessity. I did it like crazy. I'm going to go ahead and pin this side together to make sure that those corners match. And I'll do it again on the other side. Make sure those corners match. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to sew along this top edge. So I'll meet you at my sewing machine. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew these together. So we've got the pinned blocks on top here, and then our third row down here. So we're going to go ahead and take these, and we're going to go ahead and sew them together. Okay? Now remember, I still have that leader ender on top. I'm going to go ahead and put it underneath. Begin sewing. Once it grabs it, I'm going to go ahead and pull off the needle. I'm going to continue sewing. When I get to the seam line, I'm going to go ahead and pull out the next one, the next pin, so I don't sew over it. Keep on sewing. Right before I hit that needle, I'm going to pull it off again. I'm going to go ahead and sew towards the end. When I get close to that needle, pull out the last needle or the last pin. And guess what? I need another leader ender. So I'm going to grab 2 more of another project, 2.5-inch squares that I'm working on another project. I'm going to line them up nice and pretty. This is going to be my ender. Now I am a slow sewist, so just so you know. I feel like I have more control. I'm going to clip that chain piece. So here's the leader ender that I started with. There's my chain piece, or my 2 blocks sewn together. I'm going to snip off the ends, put my leader ender for another time. I'm going to open it up and check those points. They look pretty good. And I'm going to simply finger press. Okay? Because I just want it to stay open. I don't need it anything crazy. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the others. I'm going to line it up like I want the block to finish. I'm going to take this bottom row and I'm going to flip it over on top. Then I'm going to nest those seams, grab a pin, now of course people say not to put them in your mouth because you could inhale them and cause havoc. So if that's the case, I'm sorry if I've upset you, but I tend to put them in my mouth. So, like I said, there's a method for everybody. You want to nest the next seam. I'm going to place the pin on the other side of the seam. And then, because like I recognize when pinning is important for beginners, I'm going to line up the corners. I'm going to pin that together. I'm going to do it to the other side. Make sure that my seams are nested. So row 3 is pinned to row 2. Going to line it up underneath. My starter is still here. I have not cut threads. If y'all notice, I have not cut threads. We're going to get this started. Pull the first pin out. Sew until right before the needle or the pin. Pull that out. Sew to the next pin, or actually this one will line up with the seam. Pull it out. Sew right before the next pin. Pull it out. And guess what? I need another leader ender. So I'm going to take 2 more blocks from another project. Line up the 2.5 inch blocks nice and pretty to the corners, making sure I have straight edges. Make sure that my needle is at the end of the fabric. And I'm going to sew. I'm going to take my scissors, clip it out. There's my leader ender. There's a little bit of thread in between. I'm going to cut that thread. We're going to open it up and we're going to check those. Oh, this is beautiful. So beautiful. And then we're going to take it to the pressing board. Now at this point, I will tell you in these particular patterns, it is not important of which direction that you press your seams open because there's no butting on either side to any seams. The seams do not match. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to press the seams so that the way they want to go, and they want to go out away from the middle. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. Don't need to demonstrate it, I don't think. Again, if I'm wrong, let me know that I'm wrong. But I'm going to press these seams open and our 9 patches done. After that, you just need to look at the pattern and see how many 9 patch blocks that you need to make. You don't have to do one at a time like I did. Let's say you needed 6 9 patches. You're going to make sure that you are 12 or 6 or 9 or whatever the amount, and you can sit here and line them all up, flip your fabric, and chain sew every single one of them. It just makes things go a lot faster. So however many 9 patches you need, make sure that you get all 9 patches done, and then we'll go to the next block. See you in a minute. Okay, just like any block, and just like I described when we did the 9 patch, when you're beginning to build your block from units, you want to make sure that you lay it out in the manner that you want it to look when it's finished. And this is how I want my 4 patch to look when it's finished. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about. If you'll notice on this 4 patch, I got a light, dark, and then a dark, light. Okay, so you typically will have a light diagonal from each other and a dark diagonal from each other. That's typical. It's not always true. Nothing's always true in quilting, but it's very common. And what that does is it allows some magic to happen inside of your quilt or your pattern. So I just wanted to point that out to make sure, you know, if the pattern calls for it, usually if a 4 patch, they talk about doing the diagonal darks, diagonal lights. Now, the other thing too, just like we did with the 9 patch, we are going to sew row 1 together, and then we're going to sew row 2 together, and then we're going to put those rows together, okay? And the same thing goes here. You want to take from here, and you want to place it on top. Now, before you do that, if you have any directional prints, what does that mean? This particular one, you can turn it in any direction, and there's not a right or wrong. It's just whatever floats your boat. These two, however, have words. Now, yeah, you could have a little fun with it, but I don't want to, per se. I want to really make sure that they are directional and in the appropriate direction. So I want to be able to read it when I'm sitting down in front of it at the table, okay? So whenever you have directional fabric, when you're laying them out, before you start sewing, make sure that that fabric is exactly the direction that you want it to go, okay? Then again, take that left side and put it on top. Now, I talked about in the 9 patch how you wanted to set the habit about clipping or pinning the side so that you don't forget. In this particular situation, it's very important, especially since I have directional fabric, okay? So here's what happens. I'm supposed to sew on this side. So when the seam is there, I have my dark on the left and my light on the right. If I forgot and I sewed over here, what'll happen is I will have the light on the left instead. And if I flipped it around, then my words are going to be upside down, okay? So that's why I'm saying about not, you know, building that habit so you don't forget and go ahead and clip it or pin it. And that way you just can remember, okay? So let's go ahead and get these things started. See you in a sec. Okay, I will tell you guys that I did in fact straighten these up off camera so you didn't have to wait for me, and made sure that the corners were matched and made sure that they're nice and straight with each other. So I just took the clip off of this end. So I'm going to go ahead. I still got my starter here, the one that was the ender. It's still sitting there. So I'm going to go ahead, lift my presser foot a little bit, get my fabric lined up next to that needle. We're going to go ahead and sew. I told you I'm a slow sewer. I just feel like I have more control. Okay, then we're going to grab the second one. Again, I've already straightened them to help save a little time. I'm not cutting threads. I'm going to chain piece. I'm going to lift up that needle, or that presser foot, excuse me. All right, line up my fabric right up next to that needle. And I don't want to catch it on my seam guide. Okay, now at this point I need another ender. Okay, I guess I should have straightened this one out. All right, so then we're gonna send this through. don't know if you can hear the difference. My machine doesn't like batiks either. All right. So, clip off my starter, or what was my starter. Again, we have chain pieced them, so all we have is that little bitty piece of thread, and I'm just going to snip it away. No waste there. And then we are, according to most directions, we're going to go ahead and press to the dark side. So remember, you want the side that you're pressing to, you want to put it on top so that when you open it, and we're just doing a simple finger press. I do not, this is my method. The heat from my fingers is enough. And I'm just going to finger press at this point. And going to the dark side allows the seams to be going. Oh, it might help if I, no, that's right. Yeah. It allows my seams to be going in opposite directions, right? So what that's going to do for me, I'm going to take row 1. I put it just like I want it to be in my finish block. This is the row 1, this is row 2. I want to take row 1 and I want to place it on top. This is the seam. Now again, it's important that you remember which way to sew. I want it to end up like this. But if I forgot and I sewed here on the other side, we'd have a small problem, okay? Now I just got to make sure that, yeah, we're going to start all over. I want to make sure. Okay. So at this point, we just have the one seam, and you want to get it nice and nested. Okay. And I'm going to show you, well, at least attempt to, if you can actually see how they're butted up next to each other. Okay. It also does another thing for us. It actually allows us to release some bulk in our seam. If you had them both going the same direction, you would have, what would you have? You would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of fabric, and then only 2 on the other side. But when you nest them like this, you're actually allowing 4 and 4, okay? 4 layers on one side of the needle, and then when it, or one side of the seam, and when it gets over that seam line, it has 4 still. So it's not like this mountain it's going over and then a big old valley, okay? And it makes stitching a little bit more easier for your machine and helps with getting nicer stitches, especially if you have a machine that can't handle it. Now I'm going to go ahead and pin, and actually I think I'm going to pin on this side. Now we only have the one, but because I understand beginners, I typically will not pin around my corners, but I know that I have a lot of beginners that watch, and so I'm just going to demonstrate this with pinning, making sure those corners are lined up and that your sides are lined up. So here's what I've got, and I wanted to take just a second, and I'm actually going to, yes, okay, I'm going to start sewing over here, and as I come down, down, down to the seam, if you can tell, I've got the needle on the other side of the seam, so as soon as right before I hit that needle, so I'm grabbing the seam so it's not going anywhere, and you can even put the needle a little bit further away, but you can come right up to it, then pull your needle out, and that way it actually helps to hold that seam there for you, okay? So now we're just going to simply, thinking about this, I'm going to need another ender. We're going to get this started. So I am going to go ahead and begin Oh, it's not grabbing it. There it goes, maybe. Ooh, yeah. I'm going to pull the needle out. Yeah, beautiful. Now remember, when you get close, right up to that seam, but right before the needle, if you were right past the seam, that would be fine. Just try not to hit the needle. Pull your needle out. Go ahead and finish up to the next needle. Pull that out before you get to it. Finish it off. Now I will tell you that I am making 4 patches for that other project. So instead of just a 2 patch, I'm actually going to sew 2 of the 2 patches that I already did together. So then I have a 4 patch done for another project. Like I said, it's just my leader ender method. I don't know what I would do without it. No, I do know. It would just take me longer. Okay. Then we are going to snip it away from my leader ender. Again, all I have is that little piece of thread. Then you open it up. You check your make sure that you're make sure that you're got a nice point. Okay, and what you want to do at this point, now I would take it to the pressing board, and for this one, again, I don't have anything that's butting up on either side of it with another seam. The seams don't match, so you don't have to worry about direction of press. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in the direction that it wants to. So I'm going to press that with the seam actually going towards the bottom. Okay, just want to give you a heads up. You then have finished your 4 patch after you've gotten that pressed. Same way you would do with the 9 patch. Just only have the 4 patches to contend with. So then you want to make sure that you are measuring your block at the right size, and yeah, go ahead and finish all your 9 patches, because I know both variations have 9 patches. And then if you chose the variation that also has the 4 patch this week, go ahead and finish those 4 patches, and then next time we're going to take it a step further. But I'm going to go press this, and then I'll see y'all in just a second. Okay, so there you have it. You got your 9 patches and you got your 4 patches found in both variations, depending on which one you're sewing. So go ahead this week, spend some time, get all your 9 patches done, and if you're doing the variation with the 4 patch, go ahead and get all your 4 patches done. One thing I wanted to add about the 4 patch, as far as finding the end measurement, so remember I said after you press it, go ahead and measure it out and square it up if it needs to. What you want to do is you want to take the block size, and because there's 2 going across, multiply the block size by 2 and then take off 1/2 inch, and then that should be the total square. Okay, so it should be the same on going from this way and the same going from that way. So take your block size, multiply that by 2, or add 2 of them together, and then take off 1/2 inch. Okay, and that'll give you what you should get. And then the other thing, remember I did talk about that you want to check your 1/4 inch seam. I try to do that every 5th block because shift happens, and there's nothing, and trust me, I've done this twice, there's nothing more frustrating than getting all the way through all your blocks before you're putting them together and you're squaring them up and you realize they're different sizes and you got a problem because your 1/4 inch seam shifted. Okay, stuff happens. You can bump it. I mean, you can bump a button, not even realize it. If your needle moves for that, I mean, there's so many things that can happen. So you just want to, I check every 5th block. you'll end up developing your own system. I just encourage you to do it. Okay, so that's it for this week. We're getting there. We're getting there. This is the fun part, I feel. I love piecing. Of course, I love quilting too. So, at any rate, if in fact you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, especially if you know somebody who's just beginning. This can be a project that can really help increase their skills and their confidence and their love for quilting. So, because we are taking it from fabric to finish. Again, you can still get the link. It's in the description box below if you haven't already. And yeah, I will see you all next week. I look forward to it. Next week, we're going to take all the blocks and we're going to assemble the placemat. And we're going to take the blocks and put them together. So to get that placemat or the topper finished. So that's what we're going to do next week. And so until then, I will see you today. If you're watching this on the day that it aired, which is the 22nd of April. If you're watching it on the 22nd April 2020, I'll be on Facebook Live at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to answer any questions, and maybe to capture something I want to talk about more or additional to. So I'll be there. If you're watching the replay, it's still on Halo's Facebook page. There'll be a link down below for you. And yeah, I will see y'all next week to finish up the topper of the placemat. So until next time, may y'all continue to be healthy, inspired, productive, and joyful. And never stop making those dreams in quilting come true. See y'all next time. I got to get these blocks finished. See you then.